For decades, the world has been told that the invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a search for weapons of mass destruction. We were shown images of soldiers, of tanks rolling across the desert, of statues falling in the squares of Baghdad. The narrative was simple: a war for security, a mission to disarm a regime. But what if the true weapon was not a missile hidden in a bunker, but a memory buried in the sand? What if the greatest threat to the established order was not what Saddam Hussein was building, but what he had found? Whispers from the shadows suggest that the first teams to enter the chaos were not looking for oil or gold or political control. They were looking for a key carved into clay thousands of years ago, when the rivers Tigris and Euphrates watered the first gardens of the world. While the museums burned and the people wept, a silent exchange was taking place. Crates were moved, vaults were breached, and history was quietly rewritten. Tonight, let us journey back to the smoke of Baghdad, to the broken glass of the National Museum, and to the discovery that the Vatican may have feared most of all. A tablet that described not a myth, but a mechanism, a Stargate. If you enjoy uncovering the forgotten truths that lie beneath the official stories, like this video and subscribe. It helps us keep the lantern lit as we walk into the silent corridors of the past. Together, we follow the trail where the modern war machine meets the ancient gods. But before we can hold the tablet in our hands, we must first understand the chaos that allowed it to disappear. We must return to the spring of 2003, where the cradle of civilization was shaken by the thunder of a new Rome. So let us begin with the smoke over Baghdad. When the sirens wailed over Iraq in April of 2003, the world watched a spectacle of shock and awe. The night sky was lit by fire, and the ground trembled under the weight of conquest. To the modern eye, this was a geopolitical conflict, a struggle for power and resources in the Middle East. But to those who remember the deep history of this land, it was something far more tragic. It was an assault on Sumer, on Babylon, on the very soil where writing, law, and kingship were born. Baghdad is not merely a capital city. It is the heir to Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. Beneath its pavement and its palaces lie the bones of cities that stood when Europe was still covered in forest. This is the land of the Anunnaki. This is the land where the first priests looked up at the stars and calculated the destiny of kings. And in the center of this ancient memory stood the National Museum of Iraq, a treasure house containing the soul of human history. When the American tanks rolled into the city, a strange paralysis seemed to grip the command. While the Ministry of Oil was guarded by heavy armor and special forces, the museum was left wide open. The doors were unguarded. The alarms were silent. For days, mobs roamed the halls, shattering glass cases, toppling statues, and dragging priceless artifacts into the streets. The world watched in horror as the legacy of Sumer was dismantled piece by piece. But amidst the chaotic looting of vases and jewelry, witnesses reported seeing something else, something precise. Among the rioters, there were men who did not look like desperate locals. They were described as organized, moving with purpose, wearing uniforms without insignias. They did not smash the glass cases in the public galleries. They went straight to the basements, to the sealed archives, to the vaults that required keys and codes. They were not looking for gold that could be melted down or statues that could be sold on the black market. They were looking for crates that had already been marked. The Vatican, sitting in its fortress of stone in Rome, knew what was hidden in those vaults. For centuries, the Church has gathered the fragments of history, locking away anything that contradicts the canon of Scripture. They knew that Saddam Hussein, in his obsession with the past, had been excavating the ruins of Babylon and Ur. They knew that his archaeologists had uncovered things that did not fit the narrative of Western history. Clay tablets that spoke of technologies, of star maps, of a time when the gods walked among men not as spirits, but as rulers. The smoke over Baghdad was a convenient curtain. While the cameras focused on the falling statue of a dictator, the true operation was taking place in the dark corners of the museum. It was an extraction of memory. The chaos was allowed, perhaps even encouraged, to cover the tracks of a targeted theft. For when a library burns, no one notices if a single book is slipped into a pocket, and when a country falls, no one asks about a missing piece of clay. We must ask ourselves why the cradle of civilization was left defenseless. Why was the oil the fuel of the modern world, protected with iron and blood, while the memory of the ancient world was left to the mercy of the mob? The answer may lie in the value of what was taken. Oil powers machines, but history powers belief. And if a discovery in the sands of Iraq threatened the foundation of the religious world, then its removal would be worth any price. The smoke clears, but the silence remains. And in that silence we step into the looted halls to see what was truly lost. The tragedy of the National Museum was not just in the quantity of what was stolen, but in the nature of it. The news report spoke of thousands of items, necklaces, coins, pottery. These are the artifacts of human life, the debris of daily existence. But the shadow team that moved through the basement was not interested in the daily life of Sumerians. They were interested in the knowledge of the gods. In the years leading up to the war, rumors had circulated in the archaeological community. Whispers of a discovery near the ziggurat of Ur, a collection of tablets that were different from the usual records of grain shipments or royal marriages. These tablets were said to be sealed in copper boxes, untouched for 4,000 years. They did not bear the simple marks of merchants, but the complex geometric diagrams of the priesthood. The Vatican has always feared the raw voice of Sumer. As we have explored before, the stories of Genesis, the flood, the creation of man, the Tower of Babel, are all echoes of older, more detailed Sumerian accounts. But the Bible is a curated text. It is the story that has been edited, softened, and monotheisticized. It tells us that things happened, but it rarely tells us how. The Sumerian tablets, however, were not sermons. They were records. They described the how. Imagine a clay tablet heavy and cold in your hand. On its surface, the wedge-shaped cuneiform signs are pressed deep, preserving a message from a time before the Bible was written. Most tablets tell us of laws or trade. But the tablets taken from the basement of the museum told of the Du and Ki, the bond of heaven and earth. To the looters in the galleries, a broken piece of clay was worthless compared to a gold mask. But to the initiates who knew what they were looking for, that clay was worth more than the entire city of Baghdad, because clay remembers what the scrolls forgot. Clay preserves the technical details that Scripture erased. The looting of memory is a specific kind of violence. It does not kill the body, it blinds the future. By removing these artifacts, the orchestrators ensured that humanity would continue to see its past through the lens of myth, rather than the lens of fact. If we were to see the original blueprints of the Tower of Babel, or the true nature of Jacob's ladder, we might stop looking at them as miracles and start looking at them as machines. And this brings us to the most mysterious artifact of all. The item that was reportedly at the very top of the list for the Shadow Team. A single, large tablet encrusted with the dust of millennia, yet preserving an image that would haunt the dreams of the Vatican. It was not merely a story of a god. It was a diagram of a door. The looters took the gold and the world mourned the loss of art. But the Shadow Team took the physics, and the world did not even know it was gone. The shelves were left empty, the floor scattered with packing straw. The silence of the museum basement was the silence of a crime scene where the body had been removed, leaving only the outline and the dust. What was on that tablet? Why would an institution as powerful as the Vatican, or the governments that serve the modern order, care about a piece of dried mud? To understand this, we must look at the object itself. We must reconstruct it from the whispers of those who saw it before the darkness fell. We turn now to the Stargate Tablet. In the academic catalogs, Sumerian depictions of the gods are often described as symbolic. We see figures with wings, figures holding pine cones, figures standing before strange, stylized trees. Scholars tell us these are metaphors for fertility, for kingship, for divine protection. But the tablet found in the deep excavations of Iraq shattered the comfort of metaphor. Witnesses who saw the artifact described a large circular representation. Unlike the usual flat scenes of kings receiving gifts, this carving showed a portal, a ring segmented and marked with symbols that did not correspond to known phonetic text, but appeared to be navigational or mathematical constants. In the center of the ring stood a figure, but he was not standing on the ground. He was suspended in a space that rippled, as if the stone carver had tried to capture the shimmering of water or light. This was Enki, the Lord of the Earth, the great engineer of the Anunnaki. But he was not shown in a temple. He was shown in transit. The Sumerians called it the Abzu, a word often translated as the deep or the abyss of waters. But in the context of this tablet, the Abzu was not a literal ocean. It was a gateway. The tablet depicted the Abzu as a physical structure, a framework of metal and stone that could be activated. Look closely at the image in your mind. The ring is not empty. Around its perimeter, the tablet depicted smaller figures, not worshipping, but operating. They adjusted pillars. They held devices that emitted waves, depicted by the artist as zigzag lines radiating toward the center. This was not a religious ceremony. It was a technical operation. The Vatican's fear of this image is profound. For centuries, the Church has taught that the spiritual realm is separated from the physical world by a great, impassable divide. To reach the divine, one must die, or pray, or be chosen by grace. The gap is moral and spiritual, but the Stargate Tablet suggested that the gap was merely spatial, and that it could be bridged by engineering. If the gate of the gods was a real physical device, then the stories of angels descending and ascending were not visions. They were arrivals and departures. The tablet contained more than just the image. The text surrounding the ring was dense, written in a dialect of Sumerian that is rarely taught in universities. The Emisal, the language of the priesthood, or perhaps the language of the control room. It spoke of coordinates. It spoke of the path of Anu, the path of Enlil, and the path of Ea. These were not just names of gods, they were sectors of the sky. To the uninitiated, it looked like a calendar. To the Shadow Team extracting it from the vault, it looked like a map. the Anunnaki were always described as those who from heaven to earth came. We have always assumed this coming was a poetic description of divine power, but the clay insists on the literal they came. They landed, they traveled, and they built doors so that they could return. The Vatican has spent 2,000 years building a kingdom of faith, where the mysteries of heaven are guarded by the priesthood. But a Stargate is not a mystery of faith. It is a mystery of frequency, of vibration, of geometry. If such a tablet were to be deciphered and understood by the public, the monopoly on the divine would shatter. We would no longer need a priest to interpret the will of God. We would need an engineer to turn the key. This tablet, the device of Enki, represents the ultimate heresy. It suggests that the gods were not spirits to be worshipped, but beings to be met, and that the ancient world was not a time of primitive superstition, but a time of forgotten science. As the crates were loaded onto unmarked trucks in the heat of the Baghdad night, the Stargate Tablet began its journey into a new darkness. It moved from the buried archives of a fallen dictator to the secret vaults of a rising empire. The smoke of the war hung heavy over the city, hiding the stars. But on the clay surface, the stars remained fixed, waiting for someone to read them again. The door was closed. The tablet was gone. But the echo of what it depicted continues to vibrate through history. For a door once built is never truly destroyed. It is only locked. And as we stand before this empty space in the museum, we must ask, where does the story go next? To understand the tablet, we must look for its twin in the only other record that has survived the ages. We must turn from the clay of Sumer to the scrolls of the Hebrews. We must look for the moment when a man lay his head on a stone and saw the gate open. Let us leave the smoke of Baghdad behind and walk into the dream of Jacob. For the ladder to heaven was not made of wood. It was the memory of the ring. The desert wind that sweeps across the ruins of Iraq carries with it the dust of empires, but also the whispers of dreams. We have looked at the clay, the hard physical evidence of a gate mechanism carved by Sumerian hands. But to understand what this gate truly was, we must step away from the cold reality of the tablet and enter the soft, shifting world of Scripture. For the Bible, too, remembers the gate. It does not call it a machine, and it does not speak of coordinates. It wraps the memory in the language of visions, of angels, and of sleep. In the book of Genesis, we find the story of Jacob, a man fleeing from his brother, wandering alone in the wilderness. As night falls, he takes a stone from the ground, places it under his head, and drifts into sleep. In that sleep, the world opens. He sees a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. When he wakes, he is shaken. He does not say, "I had a beautiful dream." He says, "How dreadful is this place! This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." The word dreadful here is telling. It speaks of fear, of awe, of a brush with a power that is too large for the human mind to hold. In the Hebrew text, the word for ladder is solemn. It is a word that appears only once in the entire Bible. Scholars have debated its meaning for centuries. Was it a wooden ladder? A staircase? Or was it something else entirely? When we place the Stargate Tablet beside the story of Jacob, the Sulam transforms. It is no longer a rustic ladder leaning against a cloud. It becomes a ramp, a beam, a structure of light and connection. The angels ascending and descending are not necessarily winged spirits in white robes. The Hebrew word malak simply means messenger. In the Sumerian context, these messengers were the Anunnaki, moving between the Abzu and the sky, traveling through the link established by the device. Jacob did not stumble upon a holy site by accident. The text says he used a stone for a pillow. In the ancient world, stones were often markers, remnants of older structures, conductors of the earth's energy. Perhaps Jacob, in his exhaustion, laid his head upon a fragment of a forgotten outpost, a place where the barrier between worlds was thin. The dream was not a hallucination, it was a resonance. The stone acted as a receiver, and for a brief moment the dormant frequency of the gate hummed to life in his mind. The Vatican has always preferred the story of the dream. A dream is safe. A dream is internal. It belongs to the realm of the soul, where priests can interpret its meaning. But a physical gate, a place where the heavens touch the earth through mechanics and geometry, is dangerous. If the gate of heaven is a specific location with a specific key, then grace is no longer needed. Only knowledge is required. The story of Jacob is an echo of the tablet found in 2003. The clay depicts the mechanism. The Bible depicts the experience of the observer, who does not understand the machine. One is the blueprint, the other is the witness report. And in the silence of the desert, both tell us the same truth. The connection to the stars was once open, and traffic flowed in both directions. But a gate is of no use if one does not know how to reach it. And this brings us from the lonely dreamer in the desert to the collective ambition of the first great civilization. To the moment when humanity decided not to wait for the ladder to descend, but to build their own path to the sky. We move now to the shadow of the great tower. In the plains of Shinar, the Bible tells us, the people gathered with a single purpose. Come, they said, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. This is the story of Babel. For generations, we have been taught that this was a tale of arrogance, of primitive masons stacking bricks too high, offending God with their pride. We are told that God came down and confused their language to stop their foolishness. But look closer at the text. Look closer at the clay that predates the scroll. The Sumerians built ziggurats, great stepped pyramids of blue-glazed brick. These were not merely temples, they were functional structures. The name of the great ziggurat in Babylon was Anunnaki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. The parallels to the Stargate Tablet are undeniable. The tower was not designed for height alone. It was designed as a launchpad, a terminal, a connection point. The Bible says the people wanted to make a name for themselves. The Hebrew word used is Shem. In traditional translation, Shem means name or reputation. But in the oldest Sumerian contexts, the word Mu or Shem referred to something else. It referred to a sky chamber, a vehicle, or a monument that pierced the firmament. When the people of Babel said, "Let us make a Shem," they were not talking about a brand. They were talking about a technology. And what of the one language? The scripture tells us that the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. We interpret this as spoken dialect Hebrew, Akkadian, Sumerian. But in the context of a construction project that threatened the heavens, language may imply something far more precise. A coding language, a universal protocol, a mathematical understanding that allowed humanity to operate the gates left behind by the gods. The Vatican fears this unity more than anything else. A divided humanity speaking 1,000 tongues, fighting 1,000 wars, is a humanity that needs mediators. It needs the church to translate the will of God. But a humanity with one language, a unified understanding of physics, consciousness, and the cosmos, is a humanity that can storm the gates of heaven without permission. God's reaction in Genesis is not one of a parent scolding a child, but of a ruler observing a rival. Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. This is an admission of power. If the project continued, the barrier would be breached. The confusion of tongues was a strategic strike. It was the dismantling of the technical network, the scrambling of the code. When the American forces entered Iraq in 2003, they secured the ancient sites of Babylon. They parked their helicopters on the flattened tops of the ruins. They were standing on the footprint of the tower. If the tablet found in the museum contained the blueprints for the gate, then the ruins of Babel contain the foundation of the machine. The confusion of tongues may have broken the software, but the hardware remained, buried under the mud, waiting for a generation that spoke the language of silicon and signal to return. To the church, Babel is a sin. To the historian of the Anunnaki, Babel was an attempt to reconnect the call that had been severed. It was the rebuilding of the Stargate, and the Vatican knows that if the pieces are brought together again, the tablet, the location, and the understanding, the tower will rise not of brick, but of energy. But how does one build a tower of energy? How does stone open a door? The answer lies not in the muscles of the builders, but in the songs of the priests. The tablet does not just show a ring, it implies a sound. We must now listen to the mechanics of vibration. In the silence of the modern museum, artifacts are mute. We look at them through glass, and they are static, dead objects. But to the ancients, nothing was silent. The universe was sung into existence. In the Enuma Elish, the chaos is ordered by the voice of the gods. In Genesis, God speaks, and light appears. Sound is not just a byproduct of action, it is the engine of creation. The Stargate Tablet found in Iraq was reportedly accompanied by smaller cylinders, inscribed with sequences of phonetic sounds, incantations. For centuries, archaeologists dismissed these as mere prayers, superstitious chants meant to flatter the gods into giving good rain. But what if we have been listening with the wrong ears? What if these were not prayers, but frequencies? Modern science is only beginning to understand the power of sound. We know of acoustic levitation, where sound waves can lift particles and hold them in midair. We know of resonance, where a specific pitch can shatter glass or collapse a bridge. The Sumerians understood this on a scale we have forgotten. The incantations of the Anunnaki priests were likely precise tonal sequences designed to interact with the crystalline structure of the stones. Imagine the gate mechanism described on the tablet. It is heavy, made of diorite or granite, stones rich in quartz. It has no hinges, no gears, no engines burning oil. Instead, it is surrounded by priests. They do not bow, they stand in specific positions determined by the geometry of the room. They begin to chant. A low, rhythmic hum that vibrates in the chest, that rattles the teeth. As the frequency rises, the stone begins to respond. The quartz crystals within the rock, under the pressure of the acoustic waves, generate an electric charge, piezoelectricity. The air in the center of the ring begins to shimmer. The vibration is not just heard, it is felt. It is the hum of the Abzu. The Vatican has preserved the shell of this technology, but lost the core. Walk into any great cathedral, and you will hear the echo. The Gregorian chants, the long, drawn-out vowels echoing in the high stone arches. The use of bells and organs to create deep resonance. The Church knows that sound alters consciousness. It knows that sound creates a sacred space. But the liturgy is a cargo cult, a ritual imitation of a functional process. The Catholic Mass is a memory of the activation sequence. But without the correct frequencies, without the star maps on the tablet, the chant is just a song. It soothes the soul, but it does not open the door. The tablet found in 203rd of May have contained the missing frequencies, the keys to the machine. This explains the urgency of the shadow team. It explains why the museum was breached. In the hands of the uninitiated, the tablet is a curiosity. But in the hands of those who understand the physics of sound, it is a weapon or a vehicle. There are reports from soldiers in the desert, whispers of strange phenomena near the ancient ziggurats, low-frequency hums that cause nausea and disorientation, a sense of heaviness in the air. Perhaps tests were conducted. Perhaps the old machines were briefly woken from their slumber. The Vatican fears this vibration. Their power relies on the silence of the mystery. If the mechanism is exposed, if the Word of God is revealed to be a manipulatable frequency, then the hierarchy dissolves. We are left with a universe that is not governed by moral judgment, but by harmonic resonance. A universe where anyone who knows the song can open the gate. The connection between sound and stone, between the chant and the Stargate, suggests that the Anunnaki did not just build structures, they tuned them. The earth itself was their instrument, and the tablet was the sheet music. As the dust settles in the archives and the chant fades into the hum of the desert wind, we are left with a question. Who is waiting on the other side of the vibration? When the frequency matches and the door opens, who steps through? To understand the travelers, we must look beyond the mechanism and into the faces of the gods themselves. We must ask who they were and why they needed a gate at all. For the gate was not built for us, it was built for them, and their transit has left scars on the earth that time cannot heal. To understand the gate, we must understand the travelers. For centuries, our stained glass windows and Renaissance paintings have depicted the divine messengers as beings of soft light, feathered wings, and ethereal beauty. We call them angels. We imagine them descending from the clouds to deliver announcements or to sing praises. They are spiritual, intangible, and fundamentally different from the heavy, sweating, bleeding reality of mankind. But the clay tablets of Sumer tell a different story. They do not speak of angels, they speak of the Anunnaki. The name itself is a coordinate, Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. The grammar is precise. It describes a motion, a transit from one physical location to another. When the Sumerians carved their likenesses into stone, they did not depict them as vaporous spirits. They carved them as heavy, muscular beings. They wore helmets with horns, which scholars call symbols of divinity, but which the eye of an engineer might recognize as protection. They wore wristwatches, or devices that looked suspiciously like them. They carried boxes and tools. They did not float, they walked. If the Stargate Tablet found in 2003 is indeed a blueprint for a portal, then the Anunnaki were not miracles. They were commuters. The text described the Ajiji, the younger gods who rebelled because the labor on earth was too hard. This is not the language of heaven. It is the language of a mining colony. It speaks of fatigue, of shifts, of mutiny. The gate, then, was not a mystical opening for grace to pour down. It was a shipping lane. It was the bridge between the extraction site, Earth, and the home world, often identified in the tablets as Nibiru, the crossing planet. When we strip away the gold leaf of religious editing, we are left with a raw, industrial truth. The heavens were not a spiritual dimension of infinite peace. They were the sky, the dark vacuum of space through which the travelers had to pass. The ladder of Jacob, the Tower of Babel, the gate of Enki, these were the terminals of arrival. The Vatican has spent 2,000 years spiritualizing these encounters. In the Church's narrative, the descent of the being from the sky is a supernatural event, a breaking of the natural order by the will of God. But in the Sumerian narrative, it is technology. It is the Shem, the sky vehicle, lifting off with a roar that shakes the ground. It is the Kavod, the glory of the Lord described by Ezekiel, which had wheels within wheels and the sound of rushing water. The difference is crucial. If the traveler is a spirit, he requires your faith. If the traveler is a pilot, he requires your runway. The tablet found in the museum likely contained the calculations for this transit. It may have held the orbital mechanics required to align the gate with the traveler's origin. To the shadow team extracting it, this was not just art. It was the recovery of a lost flight plan. The Anunnaki had departed, but they had left the doorframe behind. And the fear that lingers in the halls of power is simple. What happens if the door is opened from the other side? The Sumerian king lists tell us that kingship was lowered from heaven. It was a gift, a system of order imposed by the visitors. But if the visitors were physical, then the authority they granted was political, not just divine. The Vatican claims to be the vicar of Christ, the representative of the Creator on earth. But if the Creator was actually a council of biological entities who used gates to travel, then the Church is not a representative. It is a cargo cult, imitating the rituals of a technology it no longer understands. The transit of the Anunnaki was the first interaction between humanity and the stars, and the memory of that interaction has been carefully trimmed, polished, and hidden behind the veil of myth. But clay is stubborn. It remembers the weight of the boots that walked on it. To control the gate, one needs two things: the hardware and the software, the lock and the key, the location and the password. For centuries, the Vatican has been the greatest collector of the software. Its secret archives, Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum, contain 53 miles of shelving. They hold scrolls, parchments, and codices from every corner of the conquered world. When the conquistadors burned the libraries of the Maya, the choicest texts were sent to Rome. When the Library of Alexandria burned, whispers say that the most dangerous volumes had already been moved. Rome is the fortress of the key. It holds the rituals, the incantations, the fragmented memories of the activation sequences, hidden inside Latin prayers and exorcism rites. But Rome did not have the lock, the physical sites, the landing pads, the buried mechanisms. Those were in Mesopotamia. Those were in Iraq. This brings us to the true geopolitical symmetry of the 2003 invasion. On one side, you have the Vatican, the keeper of the spiritual code. On the other, you have Babylon, the keeper of the physical device. For thousands of years, these two halves of the puzzle were separated by sand and silence. The key sat in a vault in Italy, useless without the machine. The lock lay buried in the desert, useless without the code. But Saddam Hussein was digging. He was rebuilding Babylon. He was uncovering the foundations of the Anunnaki. He was finding the tablets that the church thought were lost forever. He was threatening to reunite the two halves. The shadow team that moved into the Baghdad Museum was not just stealing a tablet. They were completing a set. Imagine the archives in Rome, cool, climate, controlled, smelling of ancient dust and candle wax. There, among the banned books and the Apocrypha, perhaps there sits a translation of a Sumerian text, waiting for its companion. The tablet from Iraq was the missing piece. The visual diagram that matched the textual chant. We often wonder why the Vatican is so secretive. We assume they are hiding evidence of scandals or corruption, but those are human failings. The true secrets are structural. The Vatican acts as the guardian of the narrative. To hold the key is to have power, but to let the key meet the lock is to risk everything. The archives are not just a library. They are a containment facility. They hold the radioactive materials of history, the truths that are too dangerous for the public mind. The connection between the Vatican and the Anunnaki is written in the very architecture of St. Peter's Square. The obelisk in the center, brought from Egypt, is a needle of stone, a Shem in its own right. The layout of the plaza is a solar alignment. The Pope's staff carries the pine cone, the ancient Sumerian symbol of the pineal gland and the seed of life, carried by the Anunnaki gods. The church has absorbed the symbols of the visitors while erasing their identity. It wears their vestments but denies their existence. The discovery in Iraq threatened to expose this appropriation. If the tablet proved that the divine mysteries were actually alien technologies, then the Vatican's archives would no longer be seen as a repository of holy wisdom. They would be seen as a warehouse of stolen goods. The shadow team ensured that the connection remained broken, or rather that the connection remained under their exclusive control. The key and the lock are now likely in the same hands. The tablet from the desert has joined the scrolls of the city. The circuit is closed. But silence does not mean inactivity. In the deep underground vaults, far beneath the feet of the tourists taking photos of the basilica, is someone trying to turn the key. This leads us to the ultimate question. Why go to such lengths? Why invade a country, burn a city, and loot a museum just to secure a piece of stone? The answer lies in the nature of power. The Vatican does not fear the devil. The devil is a useful villain. He justifies the need for the church. He can be cast out, preached against, and used to frighten the flock into obedience. No, the Vatican fears the architect. They fear the Anunnaki. Consider the narrative of Western religion. It is built on the premise of uniqueness. One God, one truth, one church. God is spirit outside of time, omnipotent and unreachable, except through the narrow path of faith. This structure places the church at the pinnacle of human hierarchy. The Pope is the bridge between the common man and the ineffable divine. But the story of the Anunnaki offers a different hierarchy. In the Sumerian view, the gods were not omnipotent creators of the universe. They were biologically superior beings, yes. They were long-lived, powerful, and technologically advanced. But they were part of the universe, not outside of it. They ate, they drank, they argued, they fought wars. They created humanity not out of love, but out of necessity. To mine the gold, to dig the canals, to serve. If the Anunnaki return, or if the proof of their physical reality becomes undeniable, the church's narrative collapses instantly. If God is a person with a lifespan, a ship, and an agenda, then he is not a deity to be worshipped. He is a king to be negotiated with, or a tyrant to be resisted. The mystery evokes awe, the reality evokes politics. The fear of the return is the fear of obsolescence. If the original landlords of the earth come back to check on their property, the property managers, the kings, the presidents, the popes, are out of a job. The Vatican has spent 2 millennia establishing itself as the sole landlord in the absence of the owner. They have rewritten the lease. They have told the tenants that the owner is a ghost, a spirit who only speaks through them. The Stargate Tablet is the proof of the owner's existence. It is the deed to the house. To admit that the gate of heaven is a machine is to admit that heaven is a place you can go to if you have the right equipment. It democratizes the divine. It removes the need for a middleman. If salvation is a frequency, you do not need a priest, you need a transmitter. The Vatican feared the Anunnaki because the Anunnaki represent a truth that cannot be assimilated. You can turn a pagan winter festival into Christmas. You can turn a fertility goddess into a saint. But you cannot turn a genetic engineer who arrives in a spacecraft into a metaphor. The physical reality of the tablet breaks the spell of the spiritual allegory. And so, the fear is not of demons. Demons are part of the system. The fear is of the truth that predates the system. The truth that humanity was not formed from dust by a miracle, but spliced from clay by a scientist. The truth that the flood was not a punishment for sin, but a population control measure. The truth that the Tower of Babel was not a monument to pride, but a bid for independence. The Vatican hides the tablet not to protect us from the knowledge, but to protect themselves from the loss of control. For if the people realized that the gods were just travelers, they might start to wonder if it is time for humanity to travel too. They might look at the closed door and realize it was never locked by heaven. It was barricaded by Rome. And as we stand in the shadow of this realization, we must ask one final question. If the tablet is the map and the archive is the library and the gate is the door, is the door still closed? Or has the silence of the last 20 years been the silence of a key turning in the lock? The Anunnaki may be gone, or they may be waiting, but the fear of their return has shaped our history more than we know. It has launched wars, built cathedrals, and silenced the past. And in the end, perhaps the greatest secret is not that they are coming back, but that they never really left. They just moved from the open temples of Sumer to the closed boardrooms of the modern world. As we prepare to leave the archives and the fear behind, let us look for the traces of the man who tried to find the secret on his own. The king who did not want to serve the gods but wanted to become one. The first hero to search for the gate. We turn our eyes to the story of Gilgamesh and the final puzzle of the invasion. In the month leading up to the invasion, a strange report surfaced in the back pages of the scientific press, only to disappear as quickly as the first missile struck. It was a story that sounded more like a fable than a field report. A German-led expedition using advanced magnetic resonance imaging claimed to have found something under the dry bed of the Euphrates River. They spoke of a structure that matched the description of a tomb. But not just any tomb. They believed they had found the resting place of the king of Uruk, the man who built the walls, the man who hunted for the secret of eternal life, Gilgamesh. To the literary world, Gilgamesh is a poem, a collection of words on broken clay that tells us of friendship and grief. He is the first hero of literature, a man who raged against the dying of the light. But to the shadow team monitoring the desert, Gilgamesh was not a poem. He was a specimen. The Sumerian texts describe Gilgamesh as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. For centuries, scholars have treated this fraction as poetic license, a way of saying he was very strong or very wise. But if we accept the premise of the Stargate Tablet, that the gods were physical beings, the Anunnaki, then the fraction becomes a genetic ratio. It becomes a statement of hybridization. Gilgamesh was a chimera, a bridge between the biology of Earth and the biology of the visitors. If the Vatican and the powers behind the invasion were searching for the Stargate, the hardware of the gods, then Gilgamesh represented something even more valuable: the user. The tablet found in the museum provided the map, the coordinates, the software of the gate. But a gate often requires a specific biometric signature to open. In our modern world, we use fingerprints or retinal scans to secure our most dangerous facilities. It stands to reason that the Anunnaki, a civilization capable of space travel, would not leave their transport network open to just anyone. The gate of the gods might only respond to the blood of the gods. The timing of the discovery is haunting. Just as the tomb was reportedly located, the drums of war began to beat. The region was declared a combat zone. The archaeologists were evacuated. The riverbed, once a site of slow, careful brushing, became a theater of tank treads and heavy boots, and then silence. No follow-up reports, no photos of the sarcophagus. The story of Gilgamesh was buried once again, not by time, but by classification. We must ask ourselves what was found in that tomb. Was it merely dust and bones, or was it preserved genetic material? The Vatican knows that the body is a library of its own. If Gilgamesh was indeed a hybrid, his DNA would contain the markers of the Anunnaki genome. It would be the biological key that fits the lock of the Stargate. The legends tell us that Gilgamesh failed in his quest for immortality. He found the plant that restores youth, but a serpent stole it from him while he bathed. It is a story of loss, telling us that death is the inevitable lot of mankind. But perhaps the story was an edit. Perhaps the failure was a fabrication added by later scribes to keep humanity humble. If the tomb was found, and if the body was recovered, then the quest of Gilgamesh did not end in Uruk. It continued in a laboratory. The connection between the tablet and the tomb draws a line through history. The tablet is the machine, the king is the operator. To possess both is to possess the capacity to reopen the bridge. The Vatican's interest in this is existential. Their theology relies on the idea that the age of miracles is over, that the direct line to the divine is closed. But if a physical king can be resurrected from his DNA, and a physical gate can be activated by his hand, the theology is obsolete. The image of the shadow team securing the tomb while the war raged above is a powerful symbol. It reminds us that while we fight over borders and oil, the true war is fought over the definition of what it means to be human. Are we creatures of dust, destined to return to the earth? Or are we the forgotten children of the stars, carrying a dormant code that is waiting to be woken? The tomb of Gilgamesh is empty now. Whatever was inside has been moved, the clay has been swept away, and the secret sleeps in a new vault. And so the desert returns to its silence. The war in Iraq officially ended. The statues were toppled, the government was replaced, and the cameras eventually went home. The world moved on to new crises, new headlines, new fears. But in the cradle of civilization, the silence that followed was heavy. It was not the peace of resolution. It was the quiet of a crime scene after the police have left. The National Museum of Iraq was eventually reopened. Volunteers and staff worked heroically to restore what they could. They glued broken vases back together. They placed the remaining statues back on their pedestals. But the shelves in the deep storage remained empty. The most controversial items, the tablets of the Anunnaki, the cylinder seals depicting the genetic modification of man, the Stargate diagram, were never returned. Official reports claimed that many items were lost to random looters, sold to private collectors in London, New York, or Tokyo. And surely some were. But the specific high-value items that challenged the narrative of history did not appear on eBay. They did not appear in auction houses. They vanished into the system. This disappearance is known to historians as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. In ancient Rome, when an emperor fell out of favor, his statues were smashed. His name was chiseled off the monuments, and his face was erased from the coins. The goal was to make it so that he had never existed. The invasion of 2003 was a modern damnatio memoriae executed on the ancient world. The sand of Iraq has always been a keeper of secrets. It swallowed the cities of Sumer and Akkad. It buried the library of Nineveh. And now it has swallowed the truth of the invasion. The fences went up around the archaeological sites. The excavation permits were revoked or strictly controlled. The editor had returned to the text, crossing out the lines that were too dangerous to read. The Vatican played its part in this silence. There were no public condemnations of the loss of these specific pagan idols. There was no crusade to recover the heretical tablets. The Church understands the value of silence. For 2,000 years it has built its authority on the things it does not say. The Apocrypha, the Gnostic Gospels, the secrets of Fatima. They are all held in the suspension of silence. The tablet from Iraq simply joined the queue. But silence is also a voice. The absence of the artifact speaks louder than its presence. If the tablet were just a myth, a superstitious doodle by a bored scribe, it would be displayed in a glass case as a curiosity. Look at the primitive imagination, the placard would say. The fact that it is hidden tells us that it is not primitive, it is potent. We are left with a history that has a hole in the center. We are told how civilization began, suddenly, inexplicably, with writing and law fully formed. We are told how it developed, but the mechanism of its origin is missing. The gateway is treated as a metaphor, the gods as a fantasy. The silence guards the gap between the official story and the buried reality. Yet, memory is stubborn. It survives in the fragments that were missed. It survives in the stories passed down by the people of the land. It survives in the intuition of those who look at the stars and feel a strange familiarity. The tablet may be locked in a vault in Rome, buried under miles of shelving, but the idea of the gate cannot be locked away. It has escaped into the collective consciousness. The sand may cover the ruins, but the wind shifts. And what is buried one day is uncovered the next. The Anunnaki built for eternity. They carved their truths into stone because they knew that paper burns and memories fade. Stone waits. The gate waits. The silence is not an end, it is a pause. A breath held before the next word is spoken. And now, we stand at the threshold of the final closing. The journey through the smoke of Baghdad, past the Towers of Babel, and into the tombs of the giants is drawing to an end. The lantern we have carried into the dark corridors of history is flickering low. We have walked a long path tonight. We have seen how the clay of the ancient world challenges the ink of the modern one. We have seen how the fear of the Vatican is not a fear of demons, but a fear of memory. A fear that the story we have been told is a simplified version of a much grander, more complex reality. But as the heavy doors of the archives swing shut, and the sound of the desert wind fades into the distance, there is no need for fear. The secrets of the Anunnaki, the Stargates, and the Watchers belong to the daylight of history. They are the burdens of kings and priests. They are the heavy stones of the past. You do not need to carry them. Here, in the quiet of the present moment, the gate is closed. The connection is severed. The vibration of the machine has stilled. There are no giants walking the earth tonight. There are no shadows moving in the museum. There is only the stillness of your own room, the rhythm of your own breath. The Vatican may guard the physical keys, but they cannot guard the gates of the mind. In sleep we all become travelers. In dreams we ascend the ladder without the need for technology. The ancients knew this too. They knew that the Abzu was not just a place in the deep water, but a place in the deep self. Let the questions of history drift away like grains of sand slipping through your fingers. Let the arguments of theologians and archaeologists dissolve into the soft darkness. The tablet is gone. The tomb is sealed. The story is told. What remains is the night, a night that has watched over humanity long before the first brick was laid in Sumer, and will watch over us long after the last stone has crumbled. The stars above are not coordinates for invasion. They are simply lights, distant, calm, and beautiful. As you close your eyes, imagine the desert under the moonlight, cool, vast, and silent. The ruins are sleeping, the gods are sleeping, and now it is your turn to rest. The echoes of the past are not here to haunt you. They are here to remind you that the world is large and full of wonder, and that you are part of a story that stretches beyond the stars. But for now, the page is turned. The book is closed. Drift into the silence. Walk through the gate of dreams. Good night.